You wake up on October 8, 1871, in a small lumber town called Peshtigo, Wisconsin. The air tastes like smoke. It's been tasting like smoke for weeks now, so you don't think much of it. The pillow beneath your head is stuffed with straw that pokes through the thin fabric, and your blanket is a rough wool thing that makes your skin itch. Outside your window, the sky has that strange orange tinge it's had since September, like the sun is setting at noon. You don't know it yet, but tonight, you're going to experience something that will make the Great Chicago Fire look like a campfire that got out of hand. Chicago will lose 300 souls tonight. Your town, somewhere between 1,200 and 2,500 people will die. The exact number will never be known because the flames will be so hot they'll turn human bodies into ash that blows away on the wind. No bodies, no count, just empty spaces where people used to be. Listen to the sound of the sawmill in the distance. That rhythmic grinding has been the heartbeat of Peshtigo since William Ogden built his woodenware factory here. The largest in America, they say. You can hear the constant fall of axes in the forest surrounding town, the crash of ancient trees hitting the ground. Peshtigo exists to turn the endless forest into lumber, into furniture, into the wooden sidewalks that line every street in this town of 1,700 souls. The floorboards creak under your feet as you stand. They're made of pine, like everything else here. Your house is pine. The factory is pine. The church, the school, the bridges, even the roads are covered in sawdust from the mills. Peshtigo is essentially a pile of kindling waiting for a match, but nobody thinks about it that way. This is progress. This is civilization pushing back the wilderness. You step outside and the smoke is thicker than yesterday. It makes your eyes water. Your neighbour, a German immigrant whose name you can never quite pronounce correctly, is coughing as he heads toward the mill for his shift. He waves, you wave back. In less than 12 hours, you'll both be fighting for your lives in the Peshtigo River, and you'll never see him again. The year is 1871, and this has been the driest summer anyone can remember. The marshes that usually squelch with water are cracked mud. The Peshtigo River, normally swift and deep, is running low. When you spit, the ground drinks it up instantly, like the earth itself is thirsty. Small fires have been burning in the forest for weeks, sometimes months. Underground fires, smouldering in the peat and root systems, sending up lazy columns of smoke. Farmers use these fires to clear land. Railroad workers use them to cut paths for new tracks. Loggers use them to burn away the slash and debris they don't want to haul. Fire is a tool here. Fire is normal. Fire is how you make new farmland from old forest. The problem is, when you have dozens of these small fires burning across thousands of acres, and then you add wind, something happens. Something terrible. But you don't know that yet. Right now, you're just thinking about breakfast. Maybe some porridge if you're lucky. Maybe some bread if yesterday's baking held up. Your stomach rumbles. The smoke makes everything taste like ash, but you've gotten used to it. Down at the factory, men are already at work. The scream of saws cutting through logs echoes across town. Peshtigo produces wooden pails, wooden tubs, wooden bowls, wooden everything. The factory ships its products down to Chicago on railroad cars, endless boxcars full of wooden goods heading south to feed the growing city by the lake. Chicago is booming. Chicago needs lumber, and Peshtigo is happy to provide. Nobody in Peshtigo pays much attention to Chicago. It's a big city, sure, full of people who think they're important. But up here in the forest, you have real work to do. Trees to fell, lumber to cut, money to make. Chicago is just a customer, a name on a shipping manifest. Tonight, Chicago will burn. And everyone will hear about it because Chicago has telegraph lines that work, newspapers that will spread the story across the nation, and politicians who will demand attention and aid. Tonight, Peshtigo will also burn. And almost nobody will hear about it because the telegraph lines will melt, the newspapers will turn to ash, and the people who might have told the story will be dead. You walk toward the centre of town, past houses that lean slightly, built quickly by men who knew lumber but weren't exactly master carpenters, past the church where you'll attend services on Sunday, if you survive until Sunday, past the school where children are already reciting lessons, their voices carrying through the open windows, past the tavern where men drink away their earnings every Saturday night. The smoke is getting thicker. You notice people glancing at the sky more often than usual. There's a nervousness in the air like the feeling before a thunderstorm, except there are no clouds. Just smoke and that weird orange light that makes everything look slightly unreal. An old woman stops you on the street. She's got that look in her eyes that old women get when they're about to tell you something they think is important. "Feels wrong today," she says. "The birds left yesterday, all of them. When did you last hear a bird?" You realise she's right. The normal chatter of birds in the trees is absent. The forest is silent except for the sound of axes and saws. You shrug and keep walking because what are you supposed to do about birds leaving? Maybe they're smarter than people. Maybe they can sense what's coming. Maybe in a few hours you'll wish you had wings too. The temperature is climbing even though it's early October. It should be getting cooler by now, the first hints of the Wisconsin winter that will lock this place in ice for months. Instead, it feels like summer refused to leave. The air is hot and dry, and when you breathe deep, your throat feels scratchy, like you've been eating dust. In the forest surrounding Peshtigo, fires are burning. Small ones, supposedly controlled ones. Farmers burning brush piles, railroad crews clearing right-of-way, loggers dealing with slash, normal fires, everyday fires, the kind of fires that have been burning here for weeks without incident. Except today is different. Today, the wind is picking up. A strong southwesterly wind, the kind that comes ahead of a weather system moving in from the Great Plains. The kind of wind that takes small fires and turns them into something else entirely. But you don't know about weather systems or wind patterns. You just know it's getting breezier, and the smoke is getting thicker, and there's a strange feeling in the air like the world is holding its breath. By evening you'll understand why the birds left. By midnight you'll wish you had left too. By dawn Peshtigo will be gone. You probably think fire spread slowly. You've seen campfires die down, watched candles burn at a steady, predictable pace. Maybe you've even seen a house fire from a distance, the way firefighters can battle it for hours, the way it seems almost manageable if you have enough water and enough men working the pumps. Forget all of that. The fire that's coming for Peshtigo tonight doesn't follow those rules. This is going to be a firestorm, and if you don't understand what that means, let me put it simply. Imagine if fire could create its own weather system. Imagine if flames could generate winds stronger than hurricanes. Imagine heat so intense that wood doesn't burn, it explodes. Right now, as you go about your morning in Peshtigo, approximately 40 to 60 miles to the west and south, dozens of small fires are burning. Most of them are deliberate. A farmer here is burning a brush pile. A railroad crew there is clearing undergrowth. Some are accidental, sparked by a locomotive's coal, or a campfire that wasn't quite extinguished. And some are underground, smouldering in peat deposits and root systems, fires that have been burning since July, so deep in the earth that water can't reach them. The summer of 1871 was brutal. From July through September, this region received almost no rain. We're talking about 1 inch of rainfall across 3 months, in an area that normally sees 4 times that much. The forest dried out. The undergrowth became crispy. The pine trees full of resin and pitch turned into vertical sticks of natural napalm. Even the ground itself, usually damp with moisture from springs and morning dew, baked hard as pottery. Now add wind. A cold front is moving in from the west, bringing with it wind speeds that will reach 15 to 40 miles per hour at ground level. That might not sound impressive to you, but wind doesn't have to be hurricane force to be deadly when you add fire to the equation. Wind gives fire direction, wind gives fire speed, and when fire gets hot enough it creates its own wind system, pulling in oxygen from miles around, creating a feedback loop of heat and combustion that becomes self-sustaining. The technical term is convection column. Hot air rises, pulling cooler air in at the base, feeding more oxygen to the flames, which creates more heat, which pulls in more air. In extreme cases, this creates something called a fire whirl, or what survivors will later describe as a tornado made of fire. These rotating columns of superheated gas can reach temperatures of 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. At that temperature, sand melts into glass. Iron becomes soft. Human bodies don't burn, they vaporize. You're living in a town surrounded by approximately 1.5 million acres of dried-out forest, with active fires already burning in multiple locations, with wind picking up, with no rain in the forecast. The fuel load, That's the technical term for how much burnable material exists in a given area, is catastrophic. Logging operations have left behind massive piles of slash, branches, bark, sawdust, wood chips. This debris covers hundreds of acres around Peshtigo in piles 10 to 15 feet high. It's been drying in the sun for months. The town itself is built almost entirely of pine lumber. Pine is wonderful lumber. It's easy to work with, abundant, relatively cheap. It's also extremely flammable, especially when it's been kiln-dried and turned into structural lumber. Your house is made of pine. The factory where half the town works is made of pine. The sidewalks are pine boards. The bridges crossing the Peshtigo River are pine. Even the insides of buildings are lined with pine panelling. In Chicago tonight, a fire will start in a barn. Possibly kicked off by a cow knocking over a lantern, possibly not. It will spread through a dense urban area, consuming wooden buildings, but it will encounter fire breaks, wider streets, the occasional brick building, the Chicago River. Firefighters will battle it with steam pumps and organized brigades. It will burn for about 2 days and kill approximately 300 people. In Peshtigo tonight, fires that have been burning for weeks in the surrounding forest will merge into a single massive conflagration driven by strong winds. It will generate its own weather system. It will create fire whirls that toss rail cars through the air. It will move at speeds estimated at 90 to 100 miles per hour. It will consume the town in less than 1 hour, and it will kill at least 1,200 people, possibly as many as 2,500. Nobody will ever know the exact number because many of the dead will leave no remains to count. The mathematics are simple and brutal. Massive fuel load plus extreme drought, plus high winds plus multiple ignition sources equals disaster. But mathematics don't capture what it feels like when the air itself catches fire. Numbers can't describe the sound of a firestorm approaching, like a freight train combined with a waterfall combined with thunder that never stops. Statistics don't tell you what it's like to watch your neighbours burst into flames as they run, or to hold your children's heads underwater in a river while embers rain down around you. Right now, though, those statistics are still just possibilities. The fuel is there. The drought is real. The wind is picking up. But the disaster hasn't happened yet. You're still going about your day, maybe heading to the store for supplies, maybe working at the mill, maybe teaching school or cooking dinner or repairing a fence. The town of Peshtigo is spread along both sides of the Peshtigo River, connected by a wooden bridge. On the west side is the factory complex, massive wooden buildings full of machinery, lumber, finished products ready to ship. On the east side are most of the homes, the church, the school. The river is your lifeline. It provides water for the mills, transportation for logs, and when needed, a place to cool off on hot summer days. Tonight, that river will be the difference between life and death for hundreds of people. But even the river won't be enough for many. The heat will be so intense that people standing in the water will have to keep their heads submerged, surfacing only to gasp for air before dunking again. Some will drown. Some will die from hypothermia after hours in the cold water. Some will be killed by falling debris, burning logs and embers the size of dinner plates dropping from the sky. But I'm getting ahead of the story. Right now, it's still just a normal day in Peshtigo. Smoky, yes. Unusually warm for October, sure. A bit windy, certainly. But normal. You have no idea that in about 12 hours, your world is going to end. There's something darkly ironic about the Peshtigo Fire. It killed at least 5 times as many people as the Great Chicago Fire. It burned 500 times as much land. It created fire phenomena that scientists would study for more than a century. It was by any measure a far greater disaster, and almost nobody's heard of it. Why? Because Chicago had telegraph lines that reached the rest of the country. Because Chicago was a major city with newspapers and politicians and people who could demand national attention. Because Chicago's story had a convenient villain in the form of Mrs. O'Leary's cow, a narrative so perfect that nobody cared it was probably false. Peshtigo's telegraph lines melted in the fire. Peshtigo was a frontier lumber town that most Americans couldn't find on a map. Peshtigo's story was just raw horror without a simple explanation or a memorable image. And most importantly, Peshtigo's tragedy happened on the exact same night as Chicago's, so when news finally did trickle out, It got buried in the coverage of the bigger, more famous disaster. Right now, you're living in a town that history will mostly forget. In a few hours, you'll be living through an event that will be overshadowed by something that happens 250 miles away. If you survive tonight, and that's a very big if, you'll spend the rest of your life trying to get people to understand what happened here. You'll tell your story, and people will nod politely, and then ask you about Chicago instead. But let me tell you what's worth remembering about Peshtigo. This town represents the price of American expansion in the late 19th century. The relentless push westward, the exploitation of natural resources, the attitude that forests were obstacles to be removed as quickly as possible. Peshtigo exists because Chicago and Milwaukee and St. Louis need lumber. Peshtigo exists because railroads need ties, and bridges need timbers, and settlers need houses. The forest surrounding this town is being consumed at a rate of acres per day, turned into boards and beams and barrels and furniture. Nobody thinks about sustainability. Nobody considers fire danger. Nobody questions whether cutting down old-growth forest and leaving massive piles of slash everywhere might be a problem. This is progress. This is manifest destiny. This is how you build a nation. Walk through town and you'll see the evidence everywhere. Massive tree stumps, some 4 or 5 feet across, scattered through the streets where they were too big to move easily. Piles of sawdust higher than a man's head, because what else are you going to do with sawdust? Mountains of bark stripped from logs drying in the sun. And beyond the town, in every direction, the forest broken by clear cuts and slash piles, and the skeletal remains of fire-killed trees from previous burns. The smell is always smoke mixed with pine sap mixed with sawdust. It gets in your clothes, your hair, your lungs. People develop chronic coughs that never quite go away, but that's just part of life here. Complaining about the smell of a lumber town is like complaining about the smell of a stockyard. It's what the place does. It's how the place works. The population of Peshtigo is mostly immigrants. Germans, Scandinavians, Irish, French, Canadian, a mix of people drawn by the promise of work and wages. They live in hastily built houses, work long days at the mill or in the woods, and dream of saving enough money to buy land of their own. Children work alongside adults because this is before child labour laws, before the idea that childhood should be protected rather than put to productive use. You can see those children now, running through the streets on their way to school, or working at the mill alongside their fathers, or helping their mothers with washing and cooking. Normal children in a normal town on a normal day. Tonight, many of them will die. Some will be lost in the chaos of people fleeing the flames. Some will be too small to keep their heads above water in the river. Some will simply disappear, burned so completely that not even bones remain. There's a mass grave in Peshtigo, or rather, there will be one after tonight. 350 bodies, or what's left of 350 bodies, buried together because there's no way to identify them. No distinguishing features left. No clothing to recognise. No personal effects that survived the heat. Just charred remains, if even that. Some of the dead will be identified only as the Anderson family or the Schmidt children because whole families died together and nobody survived to tell who was who. But again, I'm jumping ahead. Right now, those children are alive. Those families are intact. Peshtigo is going about its business, unaware that it is living its last normal day. The factory whistle blows, marking noon. Workers break for lunch. Men gather in the shade of buildings, eating bread and cheese and drinking water that tastes like smoke, because everything tastes like smoke. They talk about production quotas, about pay, about plans for the weekend. Normal conversations, normal concerns. Nobody's talking about fire because fire is always around. It's background noise, like the sound of the sawmill or the smell of pine sap. There are always fires burning somewhere in the area. It's October 1871 in northern Wisconsin. Of course there are fires. What they don't understand, what nobody understands yet, is that those scattered fires are about to become one fire. One massive, apocalyptic, civilization-ending fire. The kind of fire that creates its own weather. The kind of fire that defies every attempt to fight it or flee from it. The kind of fire that will make grown men weep and pray, and, in at least one documented case, kill their own children to spare them from burning alive. The wind is getting stronger. You can feel it now, a steady push from the southwest, warm and dry. It rattles the wooden shutters on houses. It kicks up dust in the streets. It bends the pine trees at the edge of town, making them sway and creak. Someone says, "Feels like we might get a storm." Someone else says, "About time, we could use the rain." They're half right. There is a storm coming, but it's not going to bring rain. Not in time, anyway. It's bringing wind, and that wind is going to take those smouldering fires in the forest and turn them into hell itself. You finish your lunch and go back to work or back home or wherever you are heading. The afternoon stretches ahead, normal and unremarkable. A few more hours of daylight, a few more hours of ordinary life in Peshtigo, Wisconsin. Make the most of them. They're all you have left. The afternoon sun hangs in a sky the colour of old copper. You've seen autumn skies before, but this isn't the usual crisp blue of October. This is smoke-filtered light, turning everything vaguely sepia-toned, like you're living inside a faded photograph. The temperature is wrong, too. It should be cooling off by now, that sharp bite of coming winter in the air. Instead, it's warm, probably 70 degrees, maybe more. You're working at the woodenware factory, or maybe you're at home tending to domestic chores, or possibly you're one of the men still out in the forest, felling trees while you still can before the snow comes. Wherever you are, you're aware of the smoke. It's thicker than it was this morning. It's making people cough more frequently. Eyes water, throats feel raw. At the factory, the massive building creaks and groans in the wind. This structure is more than 200 feet long, 3 stories tall, filled with machinery that turns raw logs into finished products. Saws scream through wood. Lathes spin. Planers smooth rough lumber into boards. The noise is constant, deafening, punctuated by the shouts of workers coordinating loads and the rumble of log carriages being pushed into position. The building shudders slightly as a stronger gust of wind hits it. Nobody pays much attention. Buildings creak. That's what they do. The foreman walks past, checking production, making sure quotas are being met. He's a thick-shouldered man named Morrison, who came up from Chicago to run this operation for William Ogden. He's thinking about shipping schedules and profit margins. He's not thinking about fire. Nobody's thinking about fire, not really. Fire is just part of the landscape here. It's been part of the landscape for months. You can't spend all day worrying about something that's been around so long it's become normal. In the forest west of town, a logging crew is cleaning up from the day's work. They felled maybe 20 trees today. Huge pines that took decades to grow, now reduced to logs ready for transport. The slash is scattered around, branches and bark and the tops of trees that aren't worth hauling. Later, someone will burn this debris. Maybe next week, maybe next month. It's not urgent. One of the loggers pauses, wipes sweat from his face, and looks west. "Smoke's getting thick out there," he says to no one in particular. His partner shrugs. Same as yesterday. Seems worse. So it's worse? What are we going to do about it? It's a fair question. What exactly can a small lumber town do about forest fires burning across thousands of acres? You can't fight fire on that scale, not with the tools available in 1871. You can protect your own property, maybe. Wet down your roof, clear brush from around your house. But stopping a major forest fire, that's not something humans are equipped to handle. The loggers finish up and start the walk back to town, carrying their tools, tired from a day of hard labour. They smell like pine sap and sweat. Their clothes are covered in sawdust. This is their life. This is everyone's life here. You work in the woods or in the mill, you smell like wood, and you go home too tired to do much besides eat and sleep before doing it all again tomorrow. Back in town, women are preparing dinner. Kitchens are hot from wood-burning stoves, even though it's warm outside. Bread is baking, stews are simmering. The normal domestic routines of a 19th century town unfolding exactly as they do every day. A child runs past your window laughing, chasing a friend in some game that makes perfect sense to them and no sense to adults. Children's voices carry on the wind. It's a pleasant sound, the sound of normal life. You don't know yet that some of those voices will be silenced tonight. You don't know that parents will spend the rest of their lives remembering the sound of their children's laughter, replaying it in their minds, wondering if they could have done something different. The church bell rings, marking 4 in the afternoon. Father Pernin, the parish priest, is in his residence next to the church working on next Sunday's sermon. He's noticed the smoke, of course. Everyone's noticed the smoke. But he's lived here long enough to know that smoke in October is as common as snow in January. The forest burns. That's what forests do in dry years. You pray for rain, and you trust that God will provide. Father Pernin will survive tonight. He'll write a detailed account of what happens, one of the few comprehensive first-hand reports of the disaster. But right now he's thinking about theology, not fire. He's considering a passage from Scripture about endurance through hardship. He'll finish that sermon. He'll give it, in fact, though not in the church he's expecting to use. At the general store, the owner is taking inventory. Flour, sugar, salt, coffee, all the staples of frontier life. Bolts of cloth, tools, hardware, a bit of everything, because this is the kind of store where you can buy a hammer and a dress and a pound of nails all in one trip. Business has been good. The town is growing. More workers mean more customers. The future looks promising. The owner's daughter, a girl of maybe 14, is sweeping the floor, preparing to close up for the day. She's humming to herself, some song she heard at church. She's thinking about a boy she saw at last week's social, wondering if he noticed her. Normal teenage concerns in a normal town on a normal day. Tonight this building will be gone. Everything in it will be ash. The owner will survive, but he'll never rebuild. He'll leave Peshtigo and never come back, unable to stay in a place that holds so much loss. His daughter will survive too, but she'll have scars from burns on her arms and back that will never fully heal. The boy she's thinking about won't survive at all, but right now none of that has happened yet. Right now it's just a girl sweeping a floor in her father's store. The wind continues to build. It's steady now, a constant pressure from the southwest, warm and dry. It rattles shutters. It makes the pine trees around town sway and bend. Dust devils spin through the streets, picking up sawdust and debris, creating miniature whirlwinds that dissipate as quickly as they form. A few people are starting to look concerned. The smoke is definitely worse. Visibility is decreasing. You can't see the far side of town clearly anymore. Everything's hazed over. Some people are wetting down their roofs just as a precaution. A few are packing valuables into trunks, getting ready to move things if it becomes necessary. But most people are just going about their business. Peshtigo has been surrounded by fires for weeks. This is just another day of smoke and worry that will probably amount to nothing. The fires will burn themselves out, or the wind will shift, or rain will come eventually. It always does. Someone suggests organising a town meeting to discuss the fire danger. Someone else points out that the men are tired from working all day, and aren't going to want to stand around discussing something they can't control anyway. The meeting doesn't happen. People go home instead, to their wooden houses on streets covered in sawdust, and a town surrounded by forest and slash piles under a smoke-filled sky, with wind picking up from the southwest. Dinner time approaches, families gather round tables, prayers are said over simple meals. Children complain about having to eat vegetables. Parents discuss plans for the coming week. Everything is so perfectly tragically normal. Outside, the light is fading. The sun is setting somewhere behind the smoke. The sky transitions from copper to bronze to a deep, ominous orange. The wind doesn't die down with sunset like it usually does. If anything, it's getting stronger. You can hear the fire now, if you listen carefully. A distant roar, like water going over a falls or like thunder that never stops. It's coming from the west, from the forest, where the small fires that have been burning for weeks are starting to merge into something larger. Someone says, "That doesn't sound good." Someone else says, "Should we?" and then stops, because nobody knows how to finish that sentence. Should we what? Leave? Go where? Everything you own is here. Your job is here. Your family is here. You can't just abandon your life because of some smoke and a distant roaring sound. So you stay. Everyone stays. Because leaving seems like an overreaction. And besides, where would you go? Out into the forest where the fires are? That makes no sense. Peshtigo is civilization. Peshtigo has buildings and streets and a river for water. If there's anywhere safe, it's here. This is the logic that will kill hundreds of people tonight. The belief that staying in town is safer than fleeing. The assumption that civilization offers protection. The failure to understand that sometimes the only way to survive is to run, even if you don't know where you're running to. The temperature is still warm even though the sun is down. You're sweating slightly. The air feels thick, hard to breathe. Your throat is scratchy from the smoke. Your eyes water. You keep telling yourself this is fine. This is manageable. This is just a bad day that will be over soon. You have no idea how right you are about it being over soon. By this time tomorrow, Peshtigo as you know it will cease to exist. 8 o'clock in the evening now. Full dark, except it's not really dark because the sky to the west is glowing orange and red. Not the orange red of a sunset. The orange red of fire. You can see it clearly now. A wall of light on the horizon, and it's getting closer. The roaring sound is louder. Much louder. It sounds like a freight train, except there's no train scheduled tonight. It sounds like wind, except wind doesn't usually sound angry. It sounds like something alive and hungry and coming this way. People are starting to panic. Not full panic yet, not the screaming chaos that will come later, but a controlled kind of fear, the kind that makes you move faster and speak in shorter sentences. Men are organising. They're going to fight the fire, or at least try to create fire breaks, or do something other than just stand here watching death approach. The factory whistle blows, calling all hands. Workers who had gone home for dinner come running back. The plan, such as it is to protect the factory. It's the economic heart of Peshtigo. If the factory survives, the town can rebuild. If the factory goes, everything goes. Men grab shovels, axes, buckets. They start clearing brush from around the factory buildings. They wet down the walls using water from the river. They dig trenches trying to create a gap that fire can't cross. It's brave and it's futile. What's coming for Peshtigo tonight won't be stopped by a few trenches and wet walls. You can feel the heat now, even though the fire is still miles away. The air temperature is climbing. It's probably 80 degrees now, maybe more, and it's 8:30 at night in October. This isn't natural. This isn't normal. Some people are praying. Others are working frantically, trying to save what can be saved. A few are just standing still, staring at the approaching glow, frozen by fear or disbelief or simple incomprehension of what's happening. Father Pernin is moving through town, trying to calm people, offering blessings and reassurance. He's as scared as everyone else, but he's a priest, so he's supposed to project confidence and faith. He tells people God will protect them. He tells them to stay calm. He tells them to gather in the church if the fire gets close, because surely God's house will be safe. He doesn't believe a word of it. He can see what's coming. He knows no building is safe from that. But what else is he supposed to say? Your only chance is to run into the river and hope you don't drown. That's not exactly comforting spiritual guidance. In the forest, the separate fires have merged. What had been dozens of small burns scattered across thousands of acres is now becoming one massive conflagration. The wind is creating a perfect storm of conditions. It's pushing all those smaller fires together, feeding them with oxygen, driving them forward at speeds that will later be estimated at 90 to 100 miles per hour. A firestorm is being born. This is a technical term for a fire that creates its own weather system. The heat is so intense that it causes air to rise rapidly, creating a powerful updraft. That updraft pulls in air from all sides, creating winds that feed more oxygen to the fire. The fire gets hotter, creating stronger updrafts, pulling in more air in a feedback loop that becomes self-sustaining. At the base of this firestorm, winds are reaching 60, 70, 80 miles per hour. At the top, the convection column is punching through the smoke layer, creating a mushroom cloud visible for miles. Fire whirls are forming, rotating columns of superheated air and flame that act like tornadoes made of fire. This is what's coming for Peshtigo. Not just fire, but fire that has transcended normal fire and become something else entirely. Fire that can throw rail cars through the air. Fire that can make trees explode from the inside as their sap boils. Fire that can melt sand into glass and turn human beings into shadows burned onto walls. You can hear screaming now, not from Peshtigo, but from smaller settlements west of town that the fire is hitting first. Sugarbush, a tiny village of maybe 40 people, is being obliterated. Everyone there will die. Their screams carry on the wind, along with the roar of the flames and the sound of buildings exploding as they superheat and burst. Some people in Peshtigo are fleeing now, not waiting for the fire to arrive. They're grabbing children, a few possessions, and running. But running where? East, away from the fire? The fire is moving faster than a person can run. North or south? The fire is spreading in those directions too. Into the forest? That's where the fire is coming from. The only option that makes any sense is the river. The Peshtigo River, running through the centre of town, maybe 50 feet wide, cold even in summer, and definitely cold now in October. If you can get in the river, maybe you can survive the fire passing over. Families are already wading into the water, fully clothed, carrying children, leading elderly relatives. The river is shocking cold. Your body tightens in response, your breath catches, but the alternative is burning alive, so you deal with the cold. People are crowding into the river now, dozens of them, maybe hundreds. It's getting hard to find space. Children are crying from the cold. Adults are trying to maintain some kind of order, but panic is setting in. The fire is visible now. Not just a glow on the horizon, but actual flames. A wall of them, maybe a mile high, roaring toward town at a speed that doesn't seem possible. At 9 o'clock, approximately 9 hours after the first major surge of wind, the firestorm hits Peshtigo. The fire doesn't arrive gradually. It doesn't creep into town, giving people time to react. It hits like a wall, like a tsunami made of heat and flame instead of water. One moment you're watching it approach. The next moment it's here. It's everywhere. It's on you. The temperature spikes to over 1,000 degrees in seconds. Wood doesn't burn at this temperature, it explodes. Entire buildings detonate as the heat flashes through them. The factory, that massive structure that men were trying to save just minutes ago, simply ceases to exist. One moment it's there, the next it's gone, turned to ash and ember in the time it takes to blink. The wooden bridge connecting the two sides of town catches fire. People who are trying to cross it find themselves trapped in the middle as the structure burns beneath their feet. Some jump into the river, some burn where they stand. The bridge collapses, taking people with it into the water below. You're in the river now, along with hundreds of others. The water that felt so cold 10 minutes ago now feels barely adequate. The air above the water is on fire. You're not being metaphorical. The air itself is burning, gases superheated to the point of combustion. If you lift your head too far out of the water, your hair catches fire. If you breathe in, your lungs burn. People are holding their breath, ducking under the water, surfacing just long enough to gasp for air before submerging again. Children are struggling. The elderly are struggling. Everyone is struggling. The river that seemed like salvation is becoming another form of death. People are drowning, panicking, pulling each other under in desperation. Embers are falling like snow, except each ember is the size of your fist and hot enough to burn through cloth instantly. They're hitting the water and hissing into steam. They're hitting people and setting clothing on fire. You watch a woman's dress ignite even though she's standing waist deep in the river. She screams and tries to pull it off, but it's already too late. The roar is deafening. It's not just the sound of fire, it's the sound of wind, of buildings exploding, of trees shattering, of people screaming. It's every terrible sound you've ever heard combined into one continuous assault on your senses. Someone next to you in the river is praying, shouting prayers over the noise. Someone else is sobbing. A child is asking where Mommy is, over and over, but there's no answer because Mommy's gone, burned or drowned or simply lost in the chaos. The heat is unbelievable. Even in the water, even submerged, you can feel it. The river itself is getting warmer. You realise with horror that if this continues, the river might actually start to boil. You've heard of such things in stories about hell, but hell is supposed to be in the afterlife, not in Peshtigo, Wisconsin, on October 8, 1871. On the banks of the river, people who didn't make it into the water in time are burning. You can see them briefly, silhouettes against the flames, and then they're gone. Just gone. No corpses, no remains. The heat is so intense it's incinerating everything organic instantly. Father Panin is somewhere in the river. He'll later write about holding onto a wooden tabernacle from the church, using it as a float, keeping his head barely above water for more than 5 hours. He'll describe watching bodies float past, some still alive and fighting, others already dead. He'll talk about the surreal quality of the experience, like watching the world end while trapped in a nightmare you can't wake from. A fire whirl touches down on the west bank of the river. It's a rotating column of flame, maybe 200 feet tall and 50 feet wide. It sounds like 1,000 freight trains. It tears apart what's left of buildings on that side of town. throwing debris into the air. You watch a rail car, a full-sized wooden rail car, get picked up and thrown. It tumbles through the air, burning as it goes, and crashes into the river about 100 yards downstream. This is impossible. This can't be happening. These are the thoughts running through your mind, except it is happening. It's very clearly happening, and your denial isn't going to change that. The sky above is orange and red and black, a swirling chaos of smoke and flame. You can't see stars. You can't see anything except fire, and more fire. The entire world has been reduced to heat and smoke and water and terror. Time loses meaning. You don't know if you've been in the river for minutes or hours. Your muscles are cramping from the cold water. Your lungs hurt from breathing superheated air. Your eyes are swollen from smoke. But you're alive, for now. That's all that matters. Being alive right now, in this moment, even though the next moment might kill you. The fire continues to rage. It's burning both sides of the river now. It's burning north and south, consuming everything in its path. The wall of flame is moving past Peshtigo, heading east, but the town itself continues to burn. There's nothing left to save. Every building is gone or going. Every wooden structure, every bridge, every sidewalk, everything. A man near you in the river suddenly lurches upward, gasps, and then goes still. He's dead. Maybe from drowning, maybe from hypothermia, maybe from smoke inhalation. It doesn't matter. He's dead, and you're not. And you push his body away because you can't help him, and you need the space. This is survival. This is what it takes to live when everything around you is dying. You stop being human in the civilized sense. You stop worrying about others. You become an animal fighting for breath, for space, for one more minute of life. Children are dying in this river. You can hear them, their cries getting weaker and then stopping. Parents are making impossible choices. Do you try to save all your children and risk losing all of them? Do you focus on the strongest and let the weakest go? These are questions no parent should ever have to answer, but people are answering them tonight, and they'll live with those answers for the rest of their lives. An hour into the firestorm, Peshtigo no longer exists as a town. It's just a burn zone, a flat expanse of glowing embers where buildings used to stand. The fire has moved on, heading east and south, consuming forest and farms and smaller settlements. But here, in the river, people are still fighting to survive the aftermath. The air is still hot but no longer instantly deadly. You can breathe without feeling like your lungs are being seared. The emberfall is lessening. The worst of it has passed. You're alive. You've survived the first hour, but the night is far from over, and you're standing in a river that's barely above freezing, exhausted, injured, surrounded by the dead and dying, with no shelter and no help coming anytime soon. Welcome to the aftermath. The flames have moved on, but you're still in the river. You have to stay in the river because the ground is still too hot to walk on. The banks are glowing embers, radiating heat that would cook your feet through your shoes if you tried to climb out. So you stay in the water, shivering now instead of sweating, trading one form of death for another. The temperature has dropped dramatically. An hour ago you were worried about burning alive. Now you're worried about freezing to death. The cold is creeping into your bones, making your fingers numb, your legs stiff. You've been in this water for maybe 2 hours now, maybe 3. You've lost track of time. Around you in the darkness, people are crying. Some are calling out names, searching for family members. Sarah, where are you? Papa, has anyone seen my son? The answers are mostly silence or sobs or the same questions thrown back. So many people missing. So many probably dead. A woman next to you is holding a child, a girl of maybe 5 or 6. The child isn't moving. Hasn't moved for a while. The woman keeps talking to her, saying, "Stay with me, sweetheart, just stay with me. We're going to be fine." But you can see, even in the dim light from the still glowing ruins of town, that the child is gone. Drowned, probably. Or died from hypothermia. The woman doesn't want to accept it. Maybe she can't accept it. So she keeps holding her dead daughter and talking to her like everything's going to be okay. You want to say something, you don't. What would you say? Your daughter is dead. That's not helpful. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is let people stay in denial a little longer. Reality will force itself on them soon enough. Your own family. Do you have a family? Maybe you do. Maybe you're frantically searching for them in the darkness, calling their names, praying they made it to the river in time. Maybe they're already gone, burned in the house before they could escape, or lost somewhere in the chaos. Maybe you're alone, which is its own kind of terrible, but at least you don't have to wonder. The survivors in the river are starting to organise, as much as traumatised, exhausted people can organise. Someone is calling for everyone to stay together, to not drift downstream. Someone else is trying to count people, though it's impossible in the darkness. Estimates will vary wildly. Maybe 200 people in the river, maybe 400. Nobody knows. Father Pernin is still clinging to his wooden tabernacle floating near the middle of the river. He's praying, though whether for himself or others isn't clear. Maybe both. His church is gone. His congregation is scattered, dead or dying. But he's still a priest, so he prays, because prayer is what you do when there's nothing else left to do. A few people are trying to climb out of the river despite the heat, driven by hypothermia-induced confusion or simple desperation. Their screams when they touch the still burning ground bring them back to their senses, send them staggering back into the water, feet blistered and burned. The waiting is terrible. You can't do anything. Can't leave the river. Can't build a fire for warmth because everything that could burn is already burned. Can't even see clearly enough to know who survived and who didn't. You're just standing in cold water in the dark, listening to people suffer, waiting for dawn. Some people are losing their minds. The trauma is too much. A man keeps laughing, high-pitched and unhinged, laughing at nothing, or everything, or the sheer absurdity of surviving hell only to freeze in a river. Someone tells him to shut up. He doesn't. Can't, probably. Others have gone silent, completely withdrawn. They're standing in the water, but they're not really there anymore. Their minds have gone somewhere else, somewhere safe, because this reality is too terrible to process. You'll see that look in their eyes later, if they survive to later. The look of people who saw too much and broke under the weight of it. Bodies are floating past. You try not to look at them, but you can't help it. Some you recognise. There's the man who ran the general store face down in the water. There's a child, you don't know whose, small enough that the current is carrying them along like driftwood. Each body you see is someone who was alive just hours ago, someone who had thoughts and feelings and plans for tomorrow. Now they're debris. You're getting colder, dangerously cold. Your shivering has progressed from mild trembling to full-body shudders that you can't control. Your teeth are chattering so hard you're worried you'll chip them. This is hypothermia. You know it intellectually, though you probably don't know the term. Your body's losing heat faster than it can produce it. Eventually, if you stay in this water long enough, you'll die just as surely as if the fire had caught you. But you can't leave. The ground is still too hot. You're trapped between fire and ice, between burning and freezing, and you have to choose freezing because at least that's slower. At least that gives you more time to hope for rescue, or dawn, or something that will let you get out of this water. Midnight passes. You think, it's hard to tell time without clocks or stars or any reference point beyond the gradually fading glow of embers on both riverbanks. Could be midnight, could be later. Doesn't really matter. Time is measured now in moments of survival, not in hours and minutes. People are starting to die from the cold. You can tell because the calls for help are getting weaker and less frequent. Because bodies that were standing are now floating. Because the woman who was talking to her dead daughter has stopped talking, has stopped moving, is just another still form in the water. A man near you, German by his accent, is singing something. A hymn maybe, or a folk song from his homeland. His voice is weak and shaky, but he keeps singing. Maybe it comforts him. Maybe he's trying to comfort others. Maybe he's just giving himself something to focus on besides the cold. After a while, the singing stops. The man is still there, still standing, but silent now. Too exhausted or too cold to continue. You try to keep moving, forcing your legs to shift position, flexing your fingers, trying to maintain circulation. It's hard. Your muscles don't want to respond. The cold makes everything slow and difficult. But if you stop moving, if you just stand still, you'll die. So you move, small movements, but enough to keep blood flowing, keep your heart working, keep yourself alive. A child is crying somewhere in the darkness. The sound is heartbreaking. You want to help, but you don't know where they are, and you can barely help yourself. The crying continues for a long time, then it stops. You tell yourself the child's parent found them, comforted them. You don't really believe it, but you tell yourself anyway because the alternative is too awful. Father Pernin, somehow still afloat, is making his way through the water, checking on people, offering what comfort he can. His presence seems to help some. Here's a priest representing God, representing order and meaning in a universe that just demonstrated it has none. People want to believe there's a reason for this, a purpose, even if that purpose is beyond human understanding. Father Pernin provides that, even if he doesn't believe it himself anymore. The stars are starting to become visible through the thinning smoke. That's something, at least. A sign that the world beyond this nightmare still exists. You focus on a particular star, bright and steady, and you use it as an anchor. As long as you can see that star, you're still alive. As long as that star shines, there's still a world worth surviving for. More bodies float past. You've stopped counting. What would be the point? Each one is a tragedy. Each one is someone's husband or wife or child. Counting them just makes the horror quantifiable, and some horrors are better left uncounted. The temperature of the water itself is dropping. It's being fed by cold streams and springs upstream, and without the fire's heat radiating into it, the river is returning to its normal October temperature, which is to say, barely above freezing. You can feel your core temperature dropping. Your thinking is getting sluggish. Your movements are becoming uncoordinated. These are signs of severe hypothermia. You're dying, slowly but surely, and there's not much you can do about it except keep moving and hope for dawn. Someone is screaming, a raw animal sound of pure anguish. It goes on and on. Nobody tries to stop them. What could you say? Their pain is legitimate. Their loss is real. Let them scream. Maybe it helps. You think about your life before tonight. Was it this morning you were working at the mill or eating breakfast or doing whatever ordinary thing you were doing? It feels like years ago. It feels like a different life that happened to a different person. You were someone then who worried about mundane things like whether there would be enough work next week, or whether you could afford new shoes or what you were going to have for dinner. Those concerns seem absurd now. Laughable. You'd give anything to go back to worrying about shoes, but you can't go back. There is no back. There's only forward, through this night, through this cold, through this water, to whatever comes next. If you survive, and that's still a big if, you'll be someone different. Someone who knows what fire can do. Someone who knows how fast civilization can disappear. Someone who carries tonight with them forever. Another hour passes, maybe two. Time is strange. Your mind keeps drifting, losing focus, snapping back when your face touches water and you realize you were falling asleep. You can't sleep. If you sleep in this water, you'll drown. Stay awake. Stay alive. Simple instructions that are getting harder to follow. The glow from the embers is fading. The town is just darkness now, a void where buildings used to stand. You can make out shapes in the slowly increasing starlight. The riverbanks, the stumps of trees, the forms of other people, but details are impossible. You're in a world of shadows and cold and the sound of water and suffering. You need to survive until dawn. That's the goal. Dawn will bring light and warmth, and hopefully the ability to get out of this river. Just make it to dawn. Just a few more hours. You can do this. You have to do this, because the alternative is dying here in this water, and after surviving the fire itself, dying from cold would be insulting. So you hold on. You keep moving. You keep your head above water. You keep existing, minute by minute, because that's all survival is. Existing. Continuing. Not giving up. It's not glamorous. It's not heroic. It's just stubbornly refusing to die for one more minute, and then another, and then another. The sky begins to lighten in the east. Finally. After hours that felt like days, morning is coming. The stars fade. The darkness becomes grey. You can see the riverbanks now, and what you see is devastating. Nothing remains. The trees that line the river are gone, burned down to charred stumps. The buildings that made up Peshtigo are gone, reduced to ash and scattered bricks from chimneys. The bridge is gone. The sidewalks, the streets, everything is gone. What's left is a scorched wasteland still smoking, covered in a layer of ash and embers. The factory where you might have worked, where hundreds of men made their living, where machinery worth thousands of dollars turned logs into finished products. Gone. Not even ruins, really. Just a footprint of destruction where a building used to stand. Your house, if you had one, is gone too. Everything you owned, every possession, every photograph, every letter, every piece of clothing, all gone, turned to smoke and ash. You're standing in a river wearing what you wore yesterday, and that's everything you have left in the world. As the light increases, you can see the true extent of the disaster. The destruction stretches in every direction. It's not just Peshtigo that burned. The forest beyond town is a blackened waste. Other communities in the distance are also smoking ruins. The fire wasn't just a local disaster, it was a regional catastrophe. People are starting to emerge from the river now that the ground has cooled enough to walk on. They move slowly, stiffly, hampered by cold, cramped muscles and exhaustion. Some have to be helped out, too weak to climb the bank on their own. Some don't come out at all, their bodies left floating in the water, victims of cold rather than flame. You haul yourself out of the river, your clothes are soaked and freezing against your skin. Your feet are numb, you can barely feel your hands, but you're alive. Against all odds, despite everything, you're alive. Father Pernin is on the bank, his wooden tabernacle beside him, looking at the ruins of his church. The building is completely gone. Where it stood is now just a pile of ash with a few bricks from the foundation. His entire life's work, the physical centre of his ministry, obliterated in an hour. Around you, survivors are calling out, still searching for missing family members. Mary? John? Has anyone seen the Thompson family? The answers are grim. So many people missing. So many unaccounted for. The work of counting the dead hasn't even begun yet. But already it's clear the toll will be enormous. A man is sitting on the ground, just sitting, staring at nothing. His face is burned, his hair singed away. He's alive but damaged, physically and probably mentally. Someone tries to talk to him. He doesn't respond, doesn't even seem to hear. He's gone somewhere inside himself where the horror can't reach. The morning sun is rising, and it's beautiful and terrible at the same time. Beautiful because it means you survived the night. Terrible because it illuminates exactly what you survived. The full scope of the destruction is visible now. Miles and miles of burned land. Multiple communities wiped out. Forest reduced to charred sticks. A landscape transformed into a vision of hell. You're in shock. Everyone's in shock. The human mind wasn't built to process this level of destruction, this amount of loss. People are moving around, but they're not really functioning. They're going through motions without purpose, walking without destination, speaking without meaning. The trauma has short-circuited something essential. Someone mentions Chicago, says they heard Chicago burned last night too. It seems impossible. Two cities, 250 miles apart, both burning on the same night. But impossible things have been happening since yesterday evening, so why not one more? What you don't know yet, what nobody in Peshtigo knows, is that Chicago's fire will dominate the news. Chicago has working telegraph lines that weren't destroyed in the fire. Chicago has newspapers and politicians and connections to the rest of the country. Chicago's tragedy will be front-page news across the nation within days. Peshtigo's tragedy will barely be mentioned. The telegraph lines are melted. The town had no newspaper. Most of the civic leaders are dead. When news of Peshtigo's destruction finally reaches the outside world, it will be weeks late and buried in coverage of Chicago's disaster. You've just survived the deadliest wildfire in American history, an event that killed at least 5 times as many people as the Great Chicago Fire, an event that should be remembered and taught in schools and memorialized in monuments. But it won't be. Peshtigo will be forgotten, overshadowed, relegated to a footnote in history. The fire that killed 1,200 to 2,500 people will be less famous than the fire that killed 300, because Chicago mattered and Peshtigo didn't. Because urban disasters get attention and rural ones get ignored. Because sometimes history is written by who can shout the loudest, and Peshtigo's voice was silenced by the same fire that destroyed it. But that's future knowledge. Right now, standing on the bank of the Peshtigo River, on the morning of October 9th, 1871, All you know is that you survived something unsurvivable. All you know is that the world ended yesterday, and somehow you're still here to see today. The question is, what do you do now? The sun continues to rise, indifferent to human suffering. It's going to be a beautiful day, actually. Clear sky, no smoke now that the fire has moved on, temperature climbing into the comfortable 60s. Perfect October weather. Perfect for anything except wandering through the ashes of your entire world. You're walking through what used to be the main street of Peshtigo. You can tell it was a street because it's slightly more organised than the surrounding destruction, a path of devastation between rows of ruin. But the buildings are gone, the sidewalks are gone, even the street signs are gone, melted or burned. You're navigating by memory, by the vague sense that this is where the general store stood, that's where the church was, over there was the school. Survivors are scattered across the burned zone, wandering like ghosts. Some are searching for recognisable remains of their homes. Some are looking for family members. Some are just walking, aimless, because standing still is harder than moving. You pass a family huddled together. They made it out, all 4 of them. Mother, father, 2 children. They're sitting in the ash, holding each other, crying. They're alive, but everything they owned is gone. Every photograph, every letter from relatives back east, every piece of furniture inherited from grandparents. Their lives have been reset to 0. They're wearing ash-stained clothes and nothing else. They're together, which is more than many can say, but together with nothing. Father Pernin is moving among the survivors, offering what comfort he can. He's exhausted, soaked, probably hypothermic, but he's still working, still ministering. He stops when he finds bodies. He says prayers over them, quick ones because there are so many bodies and so few prayers. He'll do proper services later, if there's anyone left to hold services for. The smell is terrible. Burned wood, burned flesh, burned everything. It's in your nose, your lungs, your clothes. You'll smell it for days, maybe weeks, maybe forever, because some smells don't wash out. Some smells become part of you. You find something that might have been your house. It's hard to tell. There's a brick chimney still standing, which is good because chimneys are landmarks now. Everything else is ash. You poke through the ruins with a stick, looking for anything that survived. You find metal items, a buckle from a belt, the iron head of an axe, some nails. Everything else is gone. Your clothes, your furniture, your food stores for winter, all converted to carbon and scattered by the wind. This is what you have now. The clothes you're wearing soaking wet and ash-stained. That's it. That's your complete worldly possessions. You're not unique in this. Everyone who survived has approximately the same inventory. Unless they had the presence of mind to grab something before fleeing, which almost nobody did because the fire came too fast. A woman is screaming. Not the scream of pain, the scream of discovery. She's found bodies in what used to be her home. Her husband and children, you assume, though they're burned beyond recognition. She's screaming their names anyway, as if names might bring them back, as if the force of her grief might reverse what happened. It won't. Someone goes to her, tries to lead her away. She resists, fighting to stay with her dead family. Eventually she stops fighting, goes limp, lets herself be led away. Her screaming turns to sobbing, which is quieter but somehow worse. You keep walking. You're looking for other survivors, or for bodies of people you knew, or for something, anything that will help you understand what to do next. Survival is no longer the challenge. You survived. Now the challenge is figuring out how to keep surviving in a world that no longer has the infrastructure to support life. There's no food. The stores are burned. Personal food storage is burned. The farms around Peshtigo are burned. Crops destroyed. There's no shelter. Every building is gone. There's no clothing beyond what people are wearing. No tools beyond what might have been metal and survived the fire. No medicine, no supplies, nothing. And winter is coming. This is October in Wisconsin. In a month, maybe less, the snow will start. Temperatures will drop below freezing. You need shelter and food and clothing before then, or you'll die just as surely as if the fire had caught you. You survived one disaster only to face another, slower but equally deadly. Help will come, eventually. You don't know that yet, but help will come. Chicago will send supplies. Once Chicago finishes dealing with its own disaster, other cities will send aid. The state government will respond slowly, because this is 1871, and government response to disasters is not the organised affair it will become in future decades. But help is days away, maybe weeks. Right now, you're on your own. 1,000+ survivors scattered across a burned wasteland with no resources and no plan. Somehow, you need to organise, need to create shelter, need to find food, need to identify the dead, need to do 1,000 things that seem impossible but have to be done anyway because the alternative is giving up and dying. By mid-morning, some semblance of organisation is emerging. The survivors who are capable of functioning, who aren't too injured or traumatised to move, are starting to coordinate. Someone suggests gathering everyone in one location to assess the situation. Someone else points out there is no location to gather in, because every building is destroyed. They settle on an open area near the river, a space defined more by absence than presence. People drift toward this gathering point. Individuals, families, small groups. As they arrive, a rough count begins. It's immediately clear this is going to be depressing. Peshtigo had a population of approximately 1,700 before the fire. The gathering has maybe 500 people, maybe 600. Estimates vary because nobody's keeping an accurate list and people keep wandering off and returning. Even if you assume some survivors fled to other areas, got separated, will show up later, the math is grim. At least 1,000 people from Peshtigo are missing. Most of them are probably dead. Some burned in their homes. Some burned in the streets trying to escape. Some died in the river from drowning or hypothermia. Some died in the forest trying to flee the flames. And it's not just Peshtigo. Reports are coming in from survivors of other communities. Sugarbush, a small settlement west of here, is completely gone. Every resident dead. 40 people, gone. Williamsonville to the north, destroyed. Out of 76 residents, only 19 survived. Multiple logging camps, obliterated. Farmers in isolated homesteads, burned. The final toll won't be known for weeks, maybe months, maybe ever. Father Pernin is trying to organise a list of the dead. He's asking survivors who they saw die, who they know is missing. The list grows quickly and becomes overwhelming. Entire families gone. The Johnsons, all 5 of them. The Schmidts, 7 people. The O'Connors, the Andersons, the Petersons. Family names followed by numbers. 5 dead, 7 dead, 3 dead. The numbers stack up, become numbing. Some deaths are being reported with details. Thomas Murphy died trying to save his horses from the barn. The barn collapsed on him. Sarah Williams drowned in the river with her youngest child. The Carlson family, we found their bodies in what used to be their house. They must have been trapped inside. Other deaths are just names without stories. Has anyone seen the Hendersons? No, nobody has. The Hendersons go on the missing list, which is functionally the dead list because missing almost certainly means dead. The hardest cases are the children. A boy, maybe 6 years old, blonde hair, was he anyone's? Nobody claims him. He goes on the list as unidentified child. There will be many unidentified children. Kids who got separated from parents in the chaos. Kids whose entire families died, leaving nobody to identify them. Kids burned beyond recognition. You realise something terrible. There will never be an accurate count of the dead. Too many people are simply gone, vaporised by heat so intense it left no remains. Too many victims are unidentifiable, burned beyond recognition. Too many families are completely wiped out with nobody left to report them missing. The official count, when it's eventually compiled, will list about 1,200 dead. But everyone here knows it's higher. Could be 1,500, could be 2,000. Some estimates will later go as high as 2,500. The truth is nobody knows and nobody will ever know. The Peshtigo Fire's true death toll will remain a mystery. Just one more horror in a disaster full of them. Someone organises a search party to look for survivors in the surrounding area. Volunteers, mostly men who are still physically capable, fan out across the burned zone. They're looking for people who might be injured and unable to make it back to town, or who might be sheltering in places the fire didn't quite reach. They find bodies. Lots of bodies. Some in the open, caught while trying to flee. Some in the remains of buildings trapped inside. Some in wells, where people sought refuge and died from heat or lack of oxygen. Each body discovered adds to the count, adds to the grim tally of the disaster. They also find survivors, though fewer than hoped. A family sheltered in a root cellar that somehow didn't burn. A man who spent the night neck deep in a marsh. A woman who ran far enough east to get beyond the fire's reach. Each survivor is a small miracle, celebrated briefly before the reality of the situation reasserts itself. By afternoon, the scope of the disaster is becoming clearer. This wasn't just a town fire, this was a regional catastrophe. The fire burned more than 1 million acres. It destroyed 16 communities. It killed somewhere between 1,200 and 2,500 people. It's the deadliest wildfire in American history, and it happened in the space of about 12 hours. You're standing among the survivors. And a strange thought occurs to you. You're lucky. You survived something that killed thousands. You're among the minority who made it through. But you don't feel lucky. You feel hollow, emptied out, like the fire burned away something essential inside you, along with everything else. Survival requires decisions. Do we stay here? Do we leave? Where would we even go? The debate happens informally among knots of survivors. No official meeting because there are no officials left. The mayor is dead. The town council is mostly dead. The business leaders are dead. What's left is regular people trying to figure out what to do next. Some argue for leaving immediately, walking to the nearest unburned town, which is maybe 15 miles away. Getting to civilization where there's food and shelter and the possibility of help. This makes sense except for the problems. Many survivors can't walk 15 miles in their current condition. The injured, the elderly, the children. And the route passes through burned forest, meaning no shade, no water sources that aren't contaminated with ash, no shelter if the weather turns. Others argue for staying. Help will come, they say. People will hear about the disaster and send supplies. It makes more sense to stay put and wait for rescue than to risk more deaths trying to walk out. This also makes sense, except, what if help doesn't come quickly? What if it takes days or weeks? How do you survive with no food, no shelter, no supplies? The decision ends up being a compromise. Those who are able and willing to walk will attempt to reach the nearest town to bring back help and supplies. The rest will stay here, near the river where at least there's water, and try to create some kind of camp while waiting for rescue. A group of about 20 able-bodied men prepares to make the walk. They're given what little food survived the fire, mostly some scorched vegetables pulled from the ruins of a root cellar. It's not much. They'll be hungry. But if they can reach help, they might save dozens or hundreds of lives back in Peshtigo. Father Panin volunteers to go with them. He's exhausted, still soaked from the river, but he's also the most educated person left alive, the most likely to be able to communicate the scope of the disaster to authorities. He'll walk 15 miles in wet clothes on no sleep after nearly dying in a firestorm because that's what needs to be done. The group sets out heading east, following the river initially, then striking out across the burned landscape. You watch them go, wondering if you'll ever see them again. Walking through miles of burned forest where trees could fall at any moment, where the ground might still be hot enough to injure. It's dangerous. But staying is also dangerous. Every option is dangerous. There are no safe choices anymore, just less deadly ones. Those who remain begin the work of survival. The first priority is shelter. Even crude shelter is better than nothing, and the October nights are getting cold. Survivors scavenge materials from the ruins. Metal roofing that survived the fire can be propped up as lean-tos. Charred logs can be used as windbreaks. It's not much, but it's something. The second priority is water. The river provides drinking water, though it needs to be boiled if possible to avoid disease. The problem is there's no fuel for fires. Everything that could burn is already burned. Some clever survivor figures out that coal from the burned buildings can be used. It doesn't burn hot, but it burns enough to heat water. Food is the insurmountable problem. There is no food. The stores are destroyed. Gardens are burned. Livestock is dead. The forest that might have provided game is a charred wasteland where nothing lives. You could maybe catch fish from the river, if you had fishing equipment, which you don't. You could maybe forage for roots or berries, but it's October, and you're standing in the middle of a burn zone. People are going to go hungry. Are already going hungry. The food found in that root cellar, the food given to the men who left, that was basically it. That was the entire food supply for 600 people. It's been hours since anyone ate. It will be days before help arrives with food. You're looking at mass starvation on top of everything else. Children are crying from hunger. You can hear them. Pitiful sounds that break your heart. Adults are hungry too, but better at hiding it, at staying stoic. The children don't understand why there's no food. Their parents don't know how to explain that there is no food, period, anywhere, and won't be until help comes. Someone suggests eating the horses. There were horses in town, some might have survived. If you could find them, kill them, that would be meat. It's desperate, but these are desperate times. A few men go looking. They find one horse, badly burned but alive. They kill it as mercifully as they can, which isn't very merciful because there's no proper tools. They butcher it using shards of metal from the ruins as knives. The horse provides meat for maybe 100 people. Small portions, but it's something. It's cooked over fires made with coal scavenged from ruins. It's the first meal anyone has had since before the fire. People cry while eating it, from relief or hunger, or just because they need to cry about something. Night is falling again. The survivors have been up for about 36 hours straight. Exhaustion is setting in hard. People need sleep, but there's nowhere comfortable to sleep. The ground is ash and dirt, cold now that the sun is down. The crude shelters provide minimal protection from the wind. Families huddle together for warmth. The lucky ones have blankets they grabbed before fleeing their houses. Most don't. They just have each other. Body warmth the only heating system available. It's going to be a long, cold, miserable night. Different from last night's terror, but bad in its own way. You find a spot near one of the lean-tos, lie down in the ash, pull your still damp coat tight around you. Your body is screaming for sleep, but your mind won't shut down. Images from yesterday keep replaying. The wall of fire, people burning, children drowning, all of it on loop in your head. Around you, other survivors are dealing with their own demons. Someone is crying quietly. Someone else is muttering prayers. A man is shouting in his sleep, reliving the trauma. There's no rest. Not really. Just exhausted people lying in ash, waiting for dawn, hoping that help is coming. The stars are beautiful tonight. Clear sky, no smoke, thousands of stars visible. It's the same sky that was here yesterday, indifferent to human suffering then, and indifferent now. The universe doesn't care that Peshtigo burned. The stars don't care that thousands died. They just shine, eternal and cold. You close your eyes. Sleep comes eventually, shallow and troubled, full of dreams about fire. October 10th, 1871. 48 hours after the fire, you wake in the ash, stiff and sore and still alive, which is more than many can say. The sun is rising again, indifferent to your suffering as always. It's going to be another beautiful day. That feels like mockery. The camp, if you can call it that, is stirring. People are getting up, moving slowly, bodies protesting the sleeping arrangements. Someone has gotten water boiling, using coal and metal containers scavenged from ruins. The water tastes like ash, but it's hot, and that's something. Father Pernin and his group haven't returned yet. It's too soon. They only left yesterday afternoon. The round trip will take at least a day and a half, maybe 2 days. But people are watching the eastern horizon anyway, hoping to see rescuers arriving with food and supplies. The dead need to be dealt with. This is becoming urgent. Bodies are scattered across the burn zone, and it's October, warm during the day. Decomposition is starting. Disease is a real risk. The survivors who are capable need to gather the dead and bury them before they become a health hazard on top of everything else. It's grim work. A group of men, maybe 20 of them, begin the task of collecting bodies. They use pieces of wood as makeshift stretchers. They try to identify the deceased when possible. Though many are burned beyond recognition, names are recorded when known. This is James Peterson. This is Mary Anderson. Others are just listed as unknown adult male or unknown child. You're part of this work detail because you can still walk and you're not injured. You wish you weren't. You wish someone else had volunteered, but someone has to do it, and there aren't enough someone else's to go around. The bodies are brought to a location that's been designated as the burial ground. It's near where the church stood, because even though the church is gone, the location still feels consecrated somehow. Survivors are digging a mass grave, the ground hard and difficult to work without proper tools. They're using metal pieces as shovels, boards as pry bars, hands when nothing else works. The grave needs to be large, very large. There are hundreds of bodies, maybe more, and they all need to be buried quickly. Individual graves would be ideal, but there's no time, no tools, no energy for that. A mass grave is the only practical solution. By afternoon, they're ready to start the burial. The bodies are laid in the grave, side by side, row after row. Some are intact enough to be recognisable. Some are just charred remains. Some are body parts that were found separated from the rest. All are treated with as much dignity as circumstances allow, which isn't much. Father Pernin isn't here to conduct services. He's off seeking help. Another survivor, someone who remembers enough prayers to get through a ceremony, says words over the dead. He reads from a Bible that somehow survived, one of the few books that made it through the fire. The pages are scorched at the edges, but the words are still legible. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust. The traditional burial prayer, which feels especially appropriate given that many of these bodies are quite literally ashes. The survivors listening break down crying. Some have family members in this grave. Some are crying for strangers. Some are crying for themselves, for their own losses, for the sheer, overwhelming horror of standing at a mass grave containing hundreds of people who were alive 2 days ago. The grave is filled in. The dirt is mounded over. Someone places a wooden cross at the head, hastily made from charred timbers. Later, a proper monument will be erected here. But for now, a burned cross marking a mass grave is all these people get. 350 bodies in that grave. 350 people who will never be properly identified, never have individual markers, never be mourned separately. They're part of a collective tragedy now, reduced to statistics, their individual stories lost. And that's just the identifiable bodies found so far. There are more out in the ruins, more in the forest, more that have been completely destroyed by fire and will never be found at all. The true count will never be known. Late afternoon on October 10th, the rescue party returns. They're accompanied by wagons from the nearest unburned town, loaded with supplies. Food, blankets, medical supplies, tools. Not enough for everyone, not nearly enough, but something. The survivors rush toward the wagons like starving animals, which is essentially what they are. Hands reach out, grabbing at supplies. It threatens to become a riot until someone, one of the men who made the trip, shouts for order. "Everyone will get something! Form a line! Families with children first!" Order is restored. Barely. The distribution begins. Bread is handed out, 1 loaf per family. Dried meat, small portions. Apples, a few per person. It's not much, but after 2 days of near starvation, it's everything. People cry while eating, overwhelmed by the simple act of having food again. Blankets are distributed. Medicine. Bandages for the injured. A doctor arrived with the wagons, 1 physician for hundreds of injured people. He does what he can, treating the worst cases first. Burns, broken bones, smoke inhalation damage. He works through the night, exhausted but driven by need. The wagons also brought news. Chicago burned on the same night as Peshtigo. The fire there killed about 300 people, destroyed much of the city. The news has made national headlines. Aid is pouring into Chicago from across the country. The news about Peshtigo? It's barely been reported. The telegraph lines were destroyed. The few people who knew about the disaster were focused on Chicago. Peshtigo's tragedy is being overshadowed, forgotten in the wake of the more famous fire. The survivors don't know yet that there'll be footnotes in history. They don't know that their disaster, which killed at least 4 times as many people as Chicago's, will be largely forgotten. They're just grateful that someone, anyone, knows what happened and is sending help. More aid will come in the following days and weeks. Supplies from neighbouring towns, lumber to rebuild, money donated by charitable organisations. William Ogden, the factory owner, will return to survey the damage. He'll consider rebuilding, but ultimately decide it's not worth it. The factory will never reopen. The economic heart of Peshtigo died with the town. Rebuilding will be slow. Many survivors will leave, unable to face staying in a place with so much trauma. Others will stay because they have nowhere else to go, or because they're stubborn, or because this was their home and they're not letting fire take that from them. Peshtigo will continue to exist. Slowly, painfully, buildings will be reconstructed. Life will resume, though it will never be the same. The town that rebuilds will be smaller, sadder, haunted by memories of October 8th, 1871. You survived the Peshtigo Fire. Congratulations, you're one of the lucky ones. You get to live with what you experience for the rest of your life. The physical scars are visible, burns that leave marks on your skin, injuries that don't quite heal right. A chronic cough from smoke inhalation that lingers for years. Every time you look in a mirror, every time you move wrong and feel that old injury, you're reminded of the fire. The psychological scars are worse. You have nightmares. Of course you have nightmares. You dream about fire, about burning, about drowning in the river. You dream about the people who died, their faces in the flames. You wake up screaming or crying, or just soaked in sweat, heart racing. Loud noises startle you. The sound of the wind reminds you of the firestorm's roar. The smell of smoke from a cooking fire or a chimney makes your stomach clench with fear. You're jumpy, hyper-vigilant, always scanning for danger even though the danger is long past. You have survivor's guilt. Why did you live when so many others died? What made you special? Nothing, probably. You survived through luck, through being in the right place at the right moment, through random chance. But it feels wrong that you're alive and your neighbours aren't. It feels like you should have done something, saved someone, been a hero. But you weren't. You were just another terrified person fighting to survive. Relationships suffer. If you had family who died in the fire, the grief is overwhelming and never really goes away. If your family survived, you should be grateful, and you are. But the trauma has changed everyone. You've all seen too much. The children who survived have trauma. The parents who survived are overprotective, paranoid, unable to let their kids out of sight. Trust in the world is broken. You thought you were safe. You thought civilization provided protection. You thought that bad things happened elsewhere, to other people. And then in the space of one evening, all those assumptions were revealed as lies. The world is not safe. Civilization is fragile. Bad things can happen to you, and will, and there's nothing you can do to prevent it. You'll spend the rest of your life waiting for the next disaster. Every dry summer, you'll worry about fire. Every storm, you'll worry about flooding or wind damage. You can't relax anymore. Can't feel truly safe. Because you know, in a way most people don't, how quickly everything can be taken away. Some survivors will turn to alcohol or religion or isolation to cope. Some will move far away, trying to leave the memories behind, only to find that trauma travels with you. Some will never speak of the fire again, locking it away in their minds, though it still influences everything they do. You'll be old someday if you live that long, and young people will ask you about the Peshtigo Fire. You'll try to explain what it was like. You'll fail. Words can't capture the heat, the fear, the sound of people screaming, the sight of your world ending. You'll see in their eyes that they don't really understand. They think they do, but they don't. They can't. Nobody can unless they were there. And gradually people will stop asking. The fire will fade into history. New generations will be born who never heard of Peshtigo. The disaster that killed thousands will be forgotten, reduced to a paragraph in history books, if that. Chicago's fire will be famous. Peshtigo's will be obscure, but you'll remember. Every October 8th for the rest of your life, you'll remember. You'll think about the people who died. You'll think about how close you came to dying. You'll think about the heat and the cold and the fear and the loss. You'll carry the fire with you until the day you die, a burden you can never put down. This is what survival means. Not the dramatic escape from flames, but the long, slow process of living with what you survived. The nights you can't sleep, the relationships that are broken, the fear that never quite goes away, the memories that won't fade no matter how much you want them to. You survived the Peshtigo fire, but in a way the fire never stopped burning. It just moved from the forest into your mind, where it smoulders forever. Occasionally flaring up in dreams and memories, a heat you can feel but never escape. That's the real answer to why you wouldn't survive the Peshtigo fire. Not because you'd die in the flames, though you very well might, but because even if your body survives, something essential inside you doesn't. The fire takes that, burns it away, leaves you alive but permanently changed. Survival and surviving are different things, and the Peshtigo fire proved that in the worst possible way. Let's step back from the human tragedy for a moment and examine the physics of what happened at Peshtigo, because understanding how the fire behaved helps explain why survival was so improbable. A normal fire burns in a predictable way. Heat ignites fuel, combustion produces more heat. The process continues until the fuel is exhausted or oxygen runs out. Fire spreads relatively slowly, limited by the rate at which heat can transfer to adjacent materials. Firefighters can fight normal fires because they're fighting physics that make sense, that follow rules. A firestorm is different. A firestorm is fire that has broken free from normal constraints and created its own rules, its own physics. The Peshtigo fire became a firestorm, which is why it was so deadly. Here's how it worked. The summer of 1871 created ideal conditions. Months of drought dried out vegetation, turning living forests into dead fuel waiting to ignite. The humidity dropped to single digits. The fuel moisture content, the amount of water in wood and leaves, fell to historically low levels. Basically, the forest became a massive pile of kindling. Multiple small fires were burning across this landscape, some for weeks. Underground fires in peat and root systems, surface fires from land clearing. The forest was perforated with ignition sources, dozens of them, scattered across thousands of acres. Then the wind changed. A cold front moved through, bringing strong southwesterly winds. These winds did two things. First, they pushed the scattered fires together, causing them to merge. Second, they provided abundant oxygen to feed combustion. When fires merge, the heat they produce combines and intensifies. Instead of many small fires, each producing moderate heat, you get one massive fire producing tremendous heat. This superheated air rises rapidly, creating a powerful updraft, a convection column that punches through the smoke layer and rises thousands of feet into the atmosphere. That updraft creates low pressure at the base of the fire, which pulls in air from all directions. This creates wind, strong wind, feeding more oxygen to the flames. The fire is now producing its own wind system, independent of the atmospheric wind that started it. As more air is pulled in, the fire burns hotter. As it burns hotter, the updraft strengthens. As the updraft strengthens, more air is pulled in. It's a positive feedback loop, self-reinforcing, self-sustaining. The fire has become a heat engine, converting fuel into thermal energy with terrifying efficiency. The temperatures reached in this firestorm were estimated at 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. At that temperature, wood doesn't burn in the normal sense. It undergoes pyrolysis, a chemical breakdown where the complex molecules in wood are torn apart by heat. The wood doesn't just catch fire, it explodes, releasing all its stored energy at once. This explains why buildings didn't burn down, they disintegrated. Why trees didn't fall over burned, they exploded into splinters. Why people didn't have time to flee, because the fire was moving faster than humans can run, driven by winds it created itself. The fire whirls observed during the disaster are another consequence of extreme heat. When you have a large area of intense heat, the rising air can begin to rotate, similar to how tornadoes form, but driven by heat, instead of storm dynamics. These fire whirls can reach wind speeds of over 100 miles per hour, hot enough to ignite anything they touch, strong enough to throw heavy objects like rail cars. Survivors described the air itself being on fire, which sounds impossible, but actually isn't. The fire was so hot it was pyrolyzing not just solid fuel but gases in the air. Volatile organic compounds, released from superheated wood, would ignite spontaneously in the presence of sufficient heat and oxygen. You could literally breathe in fire. This also explains why people standing in the river died. The heat above the water was sufficient to cause thermal damage to lungs even through a single breath. Surface for air, inhale superheated gas mixed with particulates. Damage your respiratory system fatally. Drown or suffocate, those were your options. You might wonder why the residents of Peshtigo didn't fight the fire. The answer is, they tried. They failed. They never had a chance. The tools available for firefighting in 1871 were primitive by modern standards. Buckets, hand pumps, axes to create fire breaks. That's basically it. Peshtigo was a small town, so they didn't even have a formal fire department, just volunteers with buckets. Those tools work fine for a house fire, maybe even a small forest fire. They're completely inadequate for a firestorm consuming acres per minute and creating its own weather patterns. Modern firefighting relies on understanding fire behaviour and using that understanding to predict and control fires. In 1871, fire science barely existed. People knew fire needed fuel and oxygen, but they didn't understand things like fire behaviour modelling, or convection columns, or how topography affects fire spread. They were fighting an enemy they didn't understand using tools that were laughably insufficient. Even if they had modern tools, modern knowledge, modern training, the Peshtigo fire would have been nearly impossible to fight. Firestorms of that magnitude are essentially unstoppable once they form. The only real defence is not letting them form in the first place, through fuel management and fire suppression. But in 1871, nobody was doing fuel management. Slash piles were left wherever they fell. Dead wood accumulated in forests. Land clearing created perfect conditions for fire spread. The entire landscape was engineered, accidentally, to maximise fire danger. The firefighters' attempts were brave and futile. Men with buckets throwing water on buildings while a wall of flame half a mile wide bearing down on them at 90 miles per hour. It was like trying to stop a tsunami with a teaspoon. The effort was admirable. The outcome was inevitable. Some survivors reported attempts to create fire breaks by demolishing buildings in the fire's path, trying to create gaps it couldn't cross. This strategy works sometimes with normal fires. It was useless against the Peshtigo firestorm, which was throwing embers miles ahead of the main fire front, starting spot fires that would then merge with the main blaze. The real tragedy is that with modern knowledge and tools, the Peshtigo fire probably could have been prevented. Better fuel management would have reduced the available combustibles. Fire lookouts would have spotted the danger earlier. Modern firefighting resources could have suppressed the fire when it was still multiple small fires instead of one massive conflagration. But that's hindsight. In the moment, with the tools and knowledge available, the people of Peshtigo had no chance of stopping what was coming. The fire was going to burn regardless of human effort. The only question was whether individuals could survive it, and for most, the answer was no. The Peshtigo fire wasn't an isolated incident. October 8th, 1871 saw massive fires across the Midwest. Chicago, obviously. Peshtigo. But also fires in Michigan, Holland, Manistee, Port Huron. Multiple ignitions across hundreds of miles, all on the same day. This seems so unlikely that some people proposed it must have been caused by something extraterrestrial, like meteor fragments from a comet. That theory has been thoroughly debunked. The cause was terrestrial and boring and all too human: drought, poor land management, and weather conditions that merged small fires into large disasters. The summer of 1871 was abnormally dry across the entire Midwest. From Illinois to Michigan to Wisconsin, rainfall was far below average. By October, the landscape was a tinderbox. Small fires were burning everywhere because fire was a common tool for land clearing. When the cold front moved through on October 8th, it brought strong winds to a huge area. Those winds fanned existing fires across multiple states simultaneously. That's why fires erupted everywhere on the same day. Not cosmic intervention, just bad luck and worse planning hitting a large region all at once. The pattern would repeat. In 1881, the Thumb Fire in Michigan killed 282 people. In 1894, more massive fires in Wisconsin and Minnesota killed hundreds. In 1910, the Great Fire swept through Idaho and Montana, killing 87. Throughout the late 19th and early 20th centuries, massive wildfires were common in America. Eventually, fire management practices improved: fuel reduction, fire suppression, better understanding of fire behaviour, public education about fire danger, building codes that required less flammable materials. The massive deadly fires became less frequent, but they never stopped entirely. The 2018 Camp Fire in California killed 85 people. The 2023 Maui fires killed 102. Modern tools and knowledge reduce the danger but can't eliminate it. Fire is a natural process. Under the right conditions, or wrong conditions depending on your perspective, fire will burn regardless of human wishes. Peshtigo was an extreme example, but it's part of a continuum. It's what happens when humans build in fire-prone areas, modify landscapes in ways that increase fire danger, and then act surprised when fire does what fire does. The lessons of Peshtigo were learned slowly, imperfectly, at great cost. We're still learning them. Every major wildfire teaches us something new about fire behaviour, about human vulnerability, about the price of living in landscapes that burn. The dead of Peshtigo paid for those lessons with their lives. The survivors paid with their trauma. The town paid with its destruction. And the lesson? Be careful with fire. Respect what it can do. Prepare for the worst. Because the worst can happen, will happen, and when it does, your survival depends on whether you're ready. October 8th, 2024. 153 years after the Peshtigo fire. The town still exists. Population about 3,500. There's a museum dedicated to the fire, housed in a small building near the mass grave. Every October 8th, a small ceremony is held to commemorate the dead. Most Americans have never heard of Peshtigo. Ask a random person about major fires in American history and they'll mention Chicago. Maybe the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire, possibly the Camp Fire or other recent disasters. Peshtigo. Blank stares. This is the final injustice of the Peshtigo fire. Not only did it kill thousands, but it did so in obscurity. The disaster that should have been front-page news across the nation for weeks was buried by coverage of Chicago's fire, forgotten almost as quickly as it happened. Why? Several reasons. Chicago was a major city, economically and politically important. Peshtigo was a small lumber town. Chicago had functioning telegraph lines that could spread news. Peshtigo's lines were destroyed. Chicago had survivors who could tell the story immediately. Peshtigo's survivors were scattered and traumatized, unable to organize a coherent narrative. Also, Chicago's fire had a story, true or not. Mrs. O'Leary's cow kicking over a lantern. It was simple, memorable, and gave people someone to blame. Peshtigo's fire was just catastrophic bad luck. Multiple factors combining in the worst possible way. That's less satisfying narratively. So Chicago became famous and Peshtigo became a footnote. The fire that killed 5 times as many people is 1/5 as well known. History is written by who can tell the story loudest, and Peshtigo's voice was silenced by the same fire that destroyed it. This matters because we learn from history, or we're supposed to. The Peshtigo fire teaches lessons about fire danger, about the consequences of poor land management, about the need for emergency preparedness. But if nobody knows the story, the lessons go unlearned. How many Americans today live in fire-prone areas without adequate preparation? How many communities are surrounded by forest or brush that hasn't been managed properly? How many people assume disaster won't happen to them because they live in civilization, just like Peshtigo did? The fire's obscurity means its warnings are unheeded, which means, inevitably, that similar disasters will happen again, are happening. The Camp Fire in California burned through Paradise, a town not unlike Peshtigo, with similarly catastrophic results. The patterns repeat because we haven't learned from the past, and we haven't learned because we don't remember. Imagine a Peshtigo-scale fire occurring in 2024. How would it play out? Would modern technology and knowledge prevent the disaster or just create a different kind of tragedy? On one hand, we'd have advantages. Satellite monitoring would detect the fire early. Weather forecasting would predict the dangerous wind conditions. Firefighting resources could be mobilized. Aerial tankers, hotshot crews, bulldozers to create fire breaks. Evacuation orders would be issued via emergency alert systems, giving people hours of warning instead of minutes. On the other hand, a modern Peshtigo would likely have more people at risk. The 1871 fire killed about 1,700 people, because that's how many lived in the affected area. A modern equivalent might burn through areas with tens of thousands of residents, because we've built more extensively in fire-prone forests. Would people evacuate? History suggests maybe not. In the Camp Fire, despite evacuation orders, many people delayed leaving, wanting to protect property or not taking the threat seriously. The result was 85 deaths and hundreds of near escapes, people fleeing through walls of flame in their cars. Modern buildings are less flammable than 1871 construction, but they still burn. Modern firefighting is more effective, but firestorms are still essentially unstoppable once they form. Modern communication means more people would know the danger. but whether they'd act on that knowledge is uncertain. The aftermath would be different. In 1871, Peshtigo's survivors waited days for help. Today, emergency response would be faster, but it might also be overwhelmed. If a fire burned through multiple communities simultaneously, affecting thousands of people, even modern disaster response could struggle to provide immediate assistance to everyone who needs it. The trauma would be similar. PTSD doesn't care what century you're in. Survivors would still have nightmares, still struggle with survivor's guilt, still face the challenge of rebuilding lives from nothing. Modern mental health resources might help some, but for others, the scars would be just as permanent as they were for the 1871 survivors. The story would be better told. Instead of being forgotten beneath Chicago's narrative, a modern Peshtigo would dominate news cycles. We'd have video footage, first-person accounts on social media, comprehensive reporting. The disaster wouldn't be forgotten. That's something at least. The dead would be remembered, their stories told, their loss acknowledged, but they'd still be dead. All the modern technology and knowledge and communication wouldn't change the fundamental fact. If you're caught in a firestorm, your survival depends on luck, quick decision-making, and factors beyond your control. Modern tools mitigate the danger. They don't eliminate it. Throughout this account we've asked, why wouldn't you survive the Peshtigo fire? It's time to be brutally honest about the answer. You wouldn't survive because survival was mostly luck. Some people did everything right and still died. Made it to the river on time, kept their heads under water, stayed calm. Died anyway from hypothermia or drowning or debris strikes or sheer bad luck. Others did everything wrong and somehow lived. Stayed in buildings that should have killed them. Ran in the wrong direction. Made terrible decisions. Lived because the firewhirl missed them by feet, or the wind shifted at the right moment. You wouldn't survive because the fire was too fast. Even if you reacted perfectly the moment you saw flames, ran immediately without hesitation, you probably couldn't outrun a fire moving at 90 miles per hour. The people who survived had a head start, got to the river early, before the main fire arrived. If you waited even a few extra minutes, you were dead. You wouldn't survive because the heat was too intense. 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to kill you without touching you, just from breathing the superheated air, hot enough to ignite clothing while you stood in water, hot enough to turn humans into ash in seconds. No amount of preparation or knowledge protects you from that. You wouldn't survive because there was no good option. Stay in buildings, they exploded. Run through streets, you burned or asphyxiated. Flee to the river, you drowned or froze. Hide in wells or root cellars. Many of those became ovens that cooked people alive. Every choice was bad. Some were just marginally less lethal than others. You wouldn't survive because you're human, and humans aren't built to survive firestorms. We're not fireproof. We can't breathe smoke. We don't do well in extreme heat or cold. Our bodies are fragile. A disaster on the scale of Peshtigo exceeds human capacity to cope. The survivors of Peshtigo lived largely through luck and a few good decisions. Got to the river early, found a deep spot, stayed calm enough to not drown, had enough physical strength to endure hours in cold water. These factors were mostly out of individual control. You can make the best decisions possible and still die if the firewhirl touches down on your location, or if debris falls on you, or if you're just in the wrong place at the wrong second. This is the uncomfortable truth about disaster survival that most people don't want to acknowledge. Sometimes you can't prepare enough or be smart enough or strong enough to survive. Sometimes the disaster is bigger than you are, and whether you live or die comes down to factors outside your control. That doesn't mean preparation is useless. The people who survived Peshtigo generally did so because they made some good choices. They recognized the danger early, they acted quickly, they found the best available refuge. Preparation matters, knowledge matters, quick decision-making matters. But they're not guarantees, they're just ways to improve your odds in a situation where the odds are terrible regardless. So why wouldn't you survive the Peshtigo fire? Because it was, simply put, unsurvivable for most people who encountered it. The 1,000+ dead aren't evidence of their failure. They're evidence of the fire's overwhelming power. When fire creates its own weather, when it moves faster than humans can flee, when it burns hot enough to vaporize flesh, survival becomes a matter of being lucky enough to avoid the worst of it. Some were lucky, most weren't. That's the answer. Not satisfying, not uplifting, not the heroic narrative we prefer in stories. But true, the Peshtigo fire would kill you because it killed most people who encountered it. And there's no particular reason to believe you'd be exceptional enough to beat those odds. October 8th marks two fire disasters. The famous Great Chicago Fire and the forgotten Peshtigo Fire. One killed 300 and is taught in schools. The other killed at least 1,200 and is barely remembered outside the affected region. This disparity is an injustice, not just to the dead of Peshtigo, though certainly to them, but also to future generations who could learn from the disaster but can't because they don't know it happened. The Peshtigo Fire teaches lessons about fire danger, about the speed with which disaster can strike, about the limits of human control over nature. It teaches humility. It teaches that civilization is more fragile than we think, that safety is provisional, that the worst can happen even when we think we're prepared. These are lessons worth learning, but they're being forgotten along with the fire that taught them. If you remember nothing else from this account, remember this. On October the 8th, 1871, somewhere between 1,200 and 2,500 people died in a fire that history has largely forgotten. They were real people. They had names, lives, families, dreams. They died horribly, burned or drowned or frozen, and their death should mean something beyond statistics. Remember them. Remember that fire can do this. Remember that your safety is not guaranteed. Remember that preparation and knowledge improve your odds but don't eliminate the danger. Remember that in the face of a firestorm, human fragility becomes starkly apparent. And maybe, if enough people remember, the lessons of Peshtigo won't have to be relearned at the cost of more lives. Maybe we'll manage our forests better, prepare our communities better, respect fire's power better. Maybe we'll prevent the next Peshtigo, or maybe we won't. Maybe the pattern will repeat because humans are slow to learn and quick to forget. Maybe another town will burn, another 1,000 people will die, another disaster will be forgotten beneath more famous tragedies. But at least for a moment you've remembered. You've thought about those people standing in the Peshtigo River on the night of October 8th, 1871, fighting for their lives. You've imagined what it was like. You've understood, as much as someone who wasn't there can understand, why survival was so improbable. That's something. It's not much, but it's something. The dead of Peshtigo deserve at least that much. To be remembered, to have their story told, to serve as a warning to future generations about what fire can do when all the wrong conditions align. Remember Peshtigo. Remember the fire. Remember that you probably wouldn't survive it, and hope you never have to find out for certain.